Logan Reed wasn't the type of CEO who sat in a high-rise office and forgot what it was like to run a restaurant floor. As the founder of Morning Maple, a cozy pancake shop that had grown into a beloved chain, Logan built his business on community trust and shared success. So when three separate complaints about missing tips surfaced within a month, all from loyal staff members, he didn't brush them off or delegate the matter. He did what few CEOs would ever consider. He stepped away from his executive desk, changed into a pair of faded jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap, and prepared to go undercover at the original downtown location of Morning Maple. The streets of the city were just starting to buzz when Logan pulled into a parking space 2 blocks from the shop. He sat in the car for a moment, watching the storefront from a distance, the golden maple leaf logo glowing softly in the morning light. It had been years since he'd last stepped foot inside that particular location as anything other than a guest of honor. Today he would be invisible. No one would recognize him. Not the customers, and especially not the employees. That anonymity gave him an edge. He needed to see things as they were, not as they pretended to be when the boss was watching. He took a deep breath, adjusted his cap, and walked toward the door. The familiar aroma of sizzling butter and warm syrup already drifting out to the sidewalk. The moment Logan entered, a subtle unease settled over him. The entrance mat was askew and hadn't been vacuumed in days. One of the overhead lights in the waiting area flickered with a faint buzz, and the hostess barely looked up from her phone as she mumbled, "Table for one," with the kind of monotone that could drain the joy from maple syrup. Logan gave a polite nod and responded, "Yes, please," making a mental note of her disengaged demeanor. She led him to a booth near the front, coincidentally, or perhaps fatefully positioned, with a perfect view of the front registers. From here he could observe the pulse of the restaurant without drawing attention to himself. He ordered the blueberry pancakes and a black coffee, then leaned back and pretended to scroll through his phone. 15 minutes passed with nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Customers came and went, orders were taken, plates were delivered, but Logan wasn't focused on the food. He had his eyes on the two cashiers at the front. One of them, a lanky young man with a patchy beard named Brandon, seemed a bit too relaxed on the job. The other, Tyler, shorter with styled hair and an easy grin, kept leaning in to whisper something to Brandon, followed by bursts of stifled laughter. Logan couldn't hear them clearly at first, but as he adjusted his posture and took a few slow bites of his pancakes, he angled himself just enough to catch the edge of their conversation. What he heard made his stomach churn more than the oversweet syrup ever could. "Yesterday was a gold mine," Tyler whispered with a grin. "That business crowd always leaves cash and never looks back." Brandon glanced around casually before replying, "Yeah, and they don't notice when the tip never makes it to the jar." Logan's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just listened. Tyler leaned in again, voice lower now. "Lady in the red blazer left a 5, just sitting there. Not my fault, it found a better home." The two laughed again, this time more discreetly. Logan forced a sip of his coffee, his mind racing. This wasn't an isolated joke, it wasn't clumsy behavior, it was theft, deliberate, quiet, and clearly not the first time Logan had always believed in building a culture of trust at Morning Maple. The tip jar at each location wasn't just for servers. It was a shared reward, something the entire team benefited from: kitchen staff, dishwashers, hosts, bussers. It encouraged camaraderie. It rewarded effort. And here were two employees not only stealing from that collective pot, but doing it with smug confidence. Logan knew that confronting them now would only make them cautious. They would cover their tracks, and it would become a matter of he said, she said. No. What Logan needed was proof. Cold, irrefutable, time-stamped and caught on camera. He took a deep breath, put down his fork, and looked around the restaurant one last time. Then slowly he formulated a plan, not as a customer, but as a CEO, ready to protect the integrity of everything he'd built. Logan sat quietly at his booth, his coffee growing cold in front of him, but his attention was locked on the two cashiers by the register. From afar, they seemed harmless, just two young employees making their way through a weekday morning shift. Tyler, with his boyish grin and animated gestures, was the more vocal of the two, while Brandon, taller and more composed, operated with a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance. They moved in sync, alternating between transactions and small talk, like they'd done this dance 100 times, but Logan wasn't watching their efficiency. He was listening for their honesty. And then it happened again, just a little louder this time, as if they had forgotten they were in public. Tyler leaned against the counter, spinning a roll of receipt paper in his hand as he chuckled to Brandon. "Yesterday was a gold mine," he said, his voice casual but smug. "Business folks always in a rush, tossing bills into the jar without thinking twice." Brandon snorted, barely glancing up, "And they never look back to see where it ends up," he replied, smirking. Tyler grinned wider. "Lady in that red blazer left a 5 right on top. Right in the open. I figured might as well put it somewhere safer." He tapped his apron pocket. Logan's jaw tensed. He could hear the pride in Tyler's voice. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was a brag, a boast, a declaration of habit. Tyler had just openly admitted to stealing from a tip jar that was meant for the entire staff, and worse, he was proud of it. As Logan processed what he'd heard, a young family approached the counter to pay 2 parents with their children, laughter still lingering from their breakfast. The father handed Tyler a credit card, and then, with sincere gratitude, pulled a crisp $10 bill from his wallet. "This is for the team," he said kindly. "Thanks for taking care of us." Tyler's response was smooth, almost rehearsed. "We appreciate that so much, sir. Have a wonderful day." The family turned to gather their belongings and head out. But Logan's eyes never left Tyler's hands. What happened next took less than a second, with a sleight of hand worthy of a magician. Tyler took the $10 bill and slipped it into his apron pocket, bypassing the transparent tip jar just inches away. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just a practiced motion and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Logan's heart sank. This was the second theft he had witnessed in real time, and now it wasn't just stories or suspicions. It was truth playing out right in front of him. He had designed Morning Maple's tip jar system to be transparent both literally and figuratively. It was a clear container placed on the counter, visible to everyone. Customers could see their generosity appreciated, and team members shared in the rewards of good service. But in that moment, Logan realized that transparency only worked when people respected the system. Tyler didn't, and worse, neither did Brandon. A few minutes later, an elderly couple approached Brandon's register, smiling politely as they handed over their bill and some cash. Logan watched closely. Brandon's posture shifted just slightly. He angled his body so the register screen faced away from view, and his hands moved swiftly across the keypad. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like any ordinary transaction, but to Logan, every keystroke felt deliberate, calculated. Brandon's fingers danced with precision, entering what seemed like a correction or void command. Then, as the couple turned to leave, Brandon casually opened the register again under the pretense of reorganizing bills, but Logan caught it. The quick curl of fingers, the slight dip of his hand into the drawer, the subtle movement of tucking something small into his pants pocket. Another theft. This one far more brazen. It wasn't just about the tips anymore. Brandon was skimming from the register, adjusting totals, voiding items, and pocketing the difference. Logan's stomach turned. He'd once written in Morning Maple's mission statement that the business would be built on honest work and shared reward. Now, standing just feet from where those words had been framed on the wall years ago, 2 of his employees were dismantling that vision piece by piece. He knew this wasn't a one-time error or the result of financial desperation. This was a system, a routine. And based on their comfort and rhythm, it had been going on for a long time. Logan didn't move. He didn't make a scene, but inside his resolve hardened. These 2 weren't just stealing money. They were stealing from their coworkers, from the company, from the values Morning Maple stood for. And if Logan had any say in it, and he certainly did, this story wouldn't end with another overlooked incident. It would end with truth, with accountability, and if justice allowed redemption for everyone hurt along the way, Because Logan hadn't just come for pancakes, he had come for answers, and now he was getting them, one stolen dollar at a time. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation filled the room, but to Logan the entire restaurant had gone quiet. His focus was entirely on the two cashiers at the front, who had now shifted from subtle sleight-of-hand theft to something far more disturbing, boasting about it. Tyler was wiping down the counter with exaggerated laziness, while Brandon leaned beside the receipt printer, stacking cups in neat towers, more out of boredom than necessity. Logan watched them closely, noting the ease with which they carried themselves, the confidence that could only come from knowing they'd gotten away with something repeatedly. And then, without warning, the conversation that followed pierced through the air and changed everything. Logan thought he knew. "Remember?" Aaron Tyler asked, his voice, light, almost amused, like they were reminiscing about an old inside joke. Brandon looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "Tall guy with glasses," he replied. "Got fired last month." Tyler smirked and nodded. "Yeah, that one. Management thought he was the one stealing from the register." Brandon snorted. If only he knew it was us the whole time. They both broke into laughter, the kind that only comes when you feel untouchable. "Man, if he knew we set him up." Tyler trailed off, still grinning. "He'd lose his mind." Brandon added. "Management ate it up. Hook, line, and sinker. Guy couldn't even defend himself." The words hit Logan like a punch to the gut. It was one thing to steal. It was another to lie, but to frame someone, an innocent man, for the very crimes they were committing just to protect their operation. That was a level of deceit that left Logan cold. He remembered Aaron clearly now. The termination had come swiftly, backed by what appeared to be airtight evidence, register discrepancies during his shifts, customer complaints, and even a supposed eyewitness report. Logan had signed off on it after a short briefing from the store manager, trusting the information presented to him, but now he saw the truth. It had all been a carefully constructed lie. He felt the blood drain from his face as he thought back to the moment he'd initialed Aaron's termination report. It had felt clean at the time, efficient. Even Aaron had no prior complaints, no write-ups. In fact, he had been in line for a supervisory promotion, but the evidence had seemed undeniable. Brandon had claimed to witness Aaron pocketing money. Tyler had provided screenshots of what looked like suspicious register activity. And Logan, trying to support his team and trust his managers, hadn't looked deeper. Now he realized he'd made a critical mistake. The truth was never in the paperwork, it had been buried beneath it. The idea that two employees would go so far as to destroy another person's career to shield themselves from scrutiny made Logan's stomach churn. Aaron hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his future. Logan imagined the aftermath, Aaron trying to explain the situation in job interviews, having to tell prospective employers he had been accused of theft, being rejected without a second glance. His name likely blacklisted across the local restaurant scene. A single accusation made credible by lies and manipulation had cost a man everything, and Brandon and Tyler. They were standing here laughing about it. The betrayal stung deeply, not just because of what had been done to Aaron, but because Logan had allowed it to happen. He had trusted the process. He had believed his staff would protect one another, but these two had turned the system into a weapon. They had weaponized the trust that Logan had tried to instill, using it as a shield while they stole freely from their coworkers and destroyed anyone who got in their way. Logan clenched his fists beneath the table. He had walked into this diner to investigate stolen tips. Now he realized he was standing in the middle of a far more elaborate and cruel con. He took a slow breath, calming the storm that had risen inside him. Reacting now wouldn't change what had already been done, but it would change what came next. If Brandon and Tyler thought they had buried the truth along with Aaron's reputation, they were wrong. Logan would uncover every lie, every doctored report, every falsified complaint, and he wouldn't stop there. He owed Aaron far more than an apology. He owed him justice. For the rest of his breakfast, Logan barely touched his food. Instead, he sat still, heart-pounding eyes fixed on the two men who had just confessed to one of the coldest betrayals he'd ever heard. The tip theft was bad. But this was personal, and Logan Reed was not about to let it go. Logan sat in his car for nearly half an hour after leaving the restaurant. The warm box of leftover pancakes on the seat beside him had long since cooled, forgotten. His thoughts circled in tight, furious loops. He kept replaying the conversation between Tyler and Brandon, the arrogant way they laughed about framing Aaron, the ease with which they stole from the tip jar the register and their coworkers. But as much as his instincts screamed for immediate action to march back inside and fire them on the spot, Logan knew that outrage wasn't enough. What he needed now wasn't just anger. He needed proof, real, indisputable evidence. Evidence that would hold up in front of every employee in HR meetings, even in court, if it came to that. Because this wasn't just about firing two thieves, it was about restoring integrity to Morning Maple and clearing Aaron's name. That evening, Logan called Jim Martinez, his head of security, and someone he had trusted for over a decade. Jim had handled everything from break-ins to fraud investigations and knew Logan's standards better than anyone I need. Eyes inside the downtown shop, Logan said without preamble. High resolution, discreet and live monitored. Every angle of the register, every interaction between those two. Jim didn't ask for names. He could hear the weight in Logan's voice. I'll have the feed ready by sunrise, he replied calmly. We'll see everything. And once we have enough, they won't be able to deny a single thing. Logan hung up, a knot of tension still lodged in his chest, but the first thread of a plan had been pulled. The hours that followed were a blur of coordination. Jim drove straight to the downtown location after closing, using his after-hours access to install additional cameras. Logan had already authorized the equipment upgrades months earlier, but now those investments were about to pay off by 3 a.m. Jim had repositioned 2 existing cameras and mounted 3 new hidden ones, one above each register, one tucked near the coffee station with a wide view of the counter and a final pinhole lens embedded in a nearby speaker grill. Every device was synced to a secure server. Only Logan and Jim could access. There would be no room for technical glitches, no lost footage. Every frame would be accounted for. As Jim worked through the night, Logan reviewed Aaron's file again. The details that once seemed damning now read like a script written by liars. Each incident lined up with one of Tyler or Brandon's shifts. Each suspicious shortage was logged under Aaron's name. Despite inconsistencies in the timeline, Logan also requested 3 months of register reports, noting a subtle dip in tip totals at the downtown location, despite sales being steady or even higher than other branches. He compared them against the other shops and noticed the difference, a pattern of voided transactions and small cash discrepancies that on paper seemed random but now felt methodical. Brandon and Tyler hadn't just stolen money. They'd created a system, a rhythm to their theft. It was as rehearsed as it was quiet. Just before dawn, Logan received a text from Jim. All cameras online. Audio is clean. No interference. Your move, boss. Logan stared at the message for a long moment, then replied with one word, tomorrow. He wasn't going to wait a week. He didn't need more rumors. He needed to see it happen. With the cameras rolling, he would return to Morning Maple that very morning, just like before, disguised as a quiet customer, invisible in plain sight. But this time, he wouldn't just observe. He would document every theft, every slip of a hand, every shady exchange. No more speculation, just hard truth. He packed his things slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of the plan he had just set in motion. This was more than an internal investigation now. It was a sting operation, a necessary one. Because if there was one thing Logan knew, it was that trust once broken could only be rebuilt with truth. And the only way to protect the honest people in his company, to right the wrongs done to Aaron, and to restore the values Morning Maple was built on, was to expose the rot at its core. With every camera placed, every detail logged, Logan stepped closer to justice, and as the city woke up around him, unaware of what was unfolding in one quiet pancake shop, he finally allowed himself a small moment of clarity tomorrow. The truth would have nowhere left to hide. The next morning arrived with a quiet determination. The sun had barely lifted over the skyline when Logan Reed stepped out of his car 2 blocks from the downtown Morning Maple location. Gone was the navy suit and crisp shirt he usually wore as the face of his company. In its place, jeans, a hoodie, and a well-worn baseball cap, a different one from his previous visit just in case. He kept his head low, face-shaded posture, casual. He was no longer the CEO. He was a nameless early customer blending into the flow of a weekday morning. But unlike last time, he wasn't here just to watch. Today, he would record, track, and collect. He had returned not only in disguise, but with a purpose as sharp as a blade. Logan entered the restaurant, greeted by the same familiar scent of maple and warm batter, but this time with a second layer, the scent of anticipation. He slid into a booth with a direct view of both registers. His phone remained face up on the table screen, dark camera ready to snap discreet notes. Hidden above him and around him, Jim's network of cameras had already begun capturing the morning routine. It wasn't long before the main actors appeared. Tyler was already behind the counter when Logan arrived, flashing that same smooth grin to customers as he rang up orders. Brandon strolled in 10 minutes later, trading an easy slap on the back with Tyler and nodding toward the growing line of patrons. Tuesdays are usually good for a little pocket change, Tyler joked. Logan, coffee in hand, jotted a quick note. Showtime. The first incident came quickly. A young professional in a tailored suit approached the register, ordered his to-go meal, and dropped a $5 bill into the clear plastic tip jar while waiting for change. Brandon, handling the transaction, smiled graciously, thanked the man, and then turned his body slightly. With a subtle reach, he adjusted the jar, then with a flick of his fingers made the $5 bill vanish into his palm. A moment later, it was gone into his apron. Logan blinked slowly, then typed a timestamp into his notes. Clear as day by 10:30 a.m., he had documented 3 more instances, some small, some bold, a $2 bill here, a folded 10 there. Each time the cash made a detour away from the tip jar and into either Tyler or Brandon's pocket. Sometimes they swapped roles. One would work the register while the other offered distractions or restocked items nearby. The pattern wasn't just theft, it was choreography. But it wasn't just the tip jar that suffered. Logan's eyes followed Brandon as he handled a to-go order complaint. A customer returned to say her pancakes were wrong. She'd asked for banana, not blueberry. Brandon apologized with well-practiced charm, called the correction to the kitchen, then turned to the register. Logan watched his fingers carefully unnecessary keystrokes, drawn-out refunds and void entries that didn't match what the customer said. A few seconds later, Brandon opened the drawer, reshuffled some bills, and palmed a $20 which disappeared with the same confidence as before. Logan noted it again, second refund manipulation. $20 taken, no matching transaction total. Tyler passed behind the counter and casually muttered, balance it out later, as if they were rearranging napkins instead of laundering money. It continued throughout the morning. 7 more tip thefts, 3 false refunds, voided transactions with no witnesses. Logan recorded each moment with meticulous care. The most damning incident came around noon when an elderly man, clearly a regular, handed a $10 bill to Tyler and said warmly, "That's for everyone. You folks always treat me well." Tyler smiled, nodded, then tucked the money into his pocket before the man had even stepped away. He didn't even pretend to put it in the jar this time. The boldness, the confidence, the absolute lack of guilt. It all painted a clear picture. This wasn't occasional dishonesty. This was a system, a strategy, and it had likely been going on for months. Logan sipped his coffee slowly, but his pulse was rapid. He hadn't needed to intervene. The evidence was compiling itself right there in plain sight. With every recorded incident, he was building a case not only strong enough to terminate Brandon and Tyler, but to potentially press criminal charges. More importantly, he was preparing to exonerate Aaron, the man who had been sacrificed to keep this operation alive. Logan glanced up briefly at the camera near the vent, then back down to his phone. Jim would be watching the live feed, logging the same timestamps. They were in sync. The plan was working. By early afternoon, Logan stood to leave. His booth was now a battlefield of notes and timestamps and half-drunk coffee. But the mission was clear. The theft wasn't occasional. It wasn't accidental. It was habitual, rehearsed, and deeply embedded. Tyler and Brandon weren't just stealing, they were performing. And what they didn't know was that the audience had arrived tomorrow. Logan wouldn't be in disguise. He would return as the man who built Morning Maple from the ground up. And this time there would be no hiding, no pocketing, and no walking away. Just consequences, just truth. The lunch crowd hit just after noon, and with it came the usual chaos orders, stacking up, silverware clinking, and the register lines stretching out the door. It was the kind of high-energy environment that Morning Maple was known for, and one that for any casual observer made the two cashiers at the front seem like efficient heroes. Tyler moved quickly, taking orders with a smile and offering compliments like a practiced performer. Brandon worked beside him, cool-headed and fast with the register keys. To customers, they were charming. To Logan, now on his second coffee, and watching closely, they were predators, masked as professionals. And then came the moment that would break any remaining illusion. An elderly man entered the shop alone, his gait slow but steady, dressed in a buttoned cardigan and a wide smile that hinted at years of familiarity with the place. He waited patiently in line, nodding kindly at the young couple behind him. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to Tyler with a warm chuckle. "You folks always do such a nice job," he said as he placed his order. "Pancakes and eggs, just the usual." Tyler greeted him with the kind of charm that would disarm anyone coming right up. "Mr. Henderson, always a pleasure." As the gentleman reached for his wallet, he pulled out a crisp $10 bill and laid it gently on the counter. "This is for the staff," he said sincerely. "You all take such good care of me." Tyler accepted the money with a nod. "Thank you, sir. We appreciate it," he said. But the moment Mr. Henderson turned his back, Tyler's expression shifted. He didn't even glance toward the tip jar. In one fluid motion, the $10 disappeared into his apron pocket. Logan's stomach twisted. There wasn't even a hint of hesitation. No guilt, no attempt to at least feign honesty. Tyler had taken a gift from an elderly customer, a man who came in regularly, who clearly cared about the staff, and pocketed it without blinking. That act alone would have been enough. But as Logan sat frozen, heart-pounding, the scene escalated. A large party of tourists entered the restaurant, and suddenly the staff was scrambling. The hostess, a young woman named Lisa, struggled to rearrange tables and communicate with the kitchen. The registers were buzzing non-stop. That was when the next move happened. Quiet, quick, and devastatingly smooth. Tyler approached the hostess stand, pointing out a table layout suggestion. He engaged Lisa in a conversation about party size, blocking her view of the counter as he kept her distracted with gestures and questions. Brandon leaned over the open register. His hands moved with purpose. With one sweep, he gathered a handful of bills, mostly 20s, some 10s, and slipped them under his waistband, hidden beneath his apron. It took less than 5 seconds. When Lisa turned back around, both men were exactly where they were supposed to be. Calm, confident, invisible. Logan scribbled notes, rapidly. 12:27 p.m. Tyler distracts. Host Brandon clears drawer. The coordination was no longer just coincidental. Logan had suspected before that they were working in tandem, but now he was certain they had a system. Tyler created the diversion, Brandon executed the theft. It was rehearsed clean and timed perfectly for the peak moments of the day. They exploited the very environment Logan had helped build, an environment meant to be fast-paced, energetic and welcoming, and they'd turned it into cover for fraud. Their ability to flow between roles, switching from customer service to criminal acts without breaking a sweat, revealed just how long this scheme had been in place. This wasn't their first lunch rush. It was probably their 50th. And what struck Logan even more deeply was the casual cruelty of it all. Mr. Henderson's kindness had been met with theft. Lisa's hard work had been used against her. The entire team had unknowingly been part of a show choreographed by two people whose only loyalty was to their own pockets. Logan stared at Tyler for a long moment. He was laughing now, joking with another server as if he hadn't just robbed someone who trusted him. And Brandon, he was counting change and cracking his knuckles, moving on like it was just another Tuesday. Logan's jaw clenched. It had taken less than 2 hours for Logan to witness everything he needed. Tip theft, register skimming, coordinated distractions, and now finally a theft from a customer who represented the heart of Morning Maple, a regular, a neighbor, someone who made this place more than just a business. Logan rose from his seat, slowly, quietly leaving his half-eaten muffin on the table. The time for watching was nearly over. He would return tomorrow no longer in disguise. No more notes, no more cameras, just truth, delivered face to face. The morning rush had passed, leaving behind half-drained coffee cups, syrup-streaked plates, and a kitchen catching its breath between waves. Logan remained at his booth, blending in, pretending to scroll through his phone while continuing to observe the floor with quiet intensity. The lull between service periods brought something different conversation. It was in these in-between moments when the pressure eased and guards were let down that people said things they didn't always mean to share. And it was in that exact moment that Logan heard something that made his heart tighten. A young server named Kayla, no older than 22, was wiping down a nearby table when she turned to Tyler at the register. Her brow was furrowed in concern, her tone casual, but clearly carrying something deeper. "Hey," she said, glancing at the nearly empty tip jar. "We've been slammed since 8. How come there's barely anything in here?" She gestured toward the jar, its contents embarrassingly light for a full morning's worth of service. Logan's eyes flicked toward Tyler, noting the split-second hesitation before he responded. That hesitation said more than his words ever could. "Oh, that," Tyler said smoothly, not missing a beat as he leaned against the counter. "People just aren't tipping much in cash anymore. Everything's cards these days. You know how it is." He chuckled and shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. They add the tips on the receipt and those go straight to payroll. Kayla nodded slowly, but her expression didn't ease. "Still feels weird," she muttered. "It used to fill up by now on weekends." Tyler gave her a sympathetic grin. "Maybe people are just tightening up. Inflation's killing everyone." "Right?" Logan could practically hear the rehearsed cadence in his voice. It was smooth, believable, and practiced. Lies rarely came that easy, unless they'd been told 100 times before. Brandon chimed in from a few feet away, tossing in his own version of the same cover story. "Yeah, I've seen a ton of customers use Apple Pay or Tap to Pay lately. Nobody carries cash anymore." He said it without even looking up, as if he'd said it so often that it no longer required attention. Logan stared at him. Tyler and Brandon weren't just thieves, they were manipulators. They had crafted a narrative, one that they likely repeated day after day to different people, deflecting suspicion with half-truths and easy explanations. It was the kind of deception that didn't just mask theft, it weaponized trust. Logan glanced back at Kayla. She was still frowning, clearly unsettled. She glanced at the jar again, then walked away, muttering something about grabbing ice from the back. Logan felt a wave of quiet sympathy for her, and for every other employee like her, working hard under the illusion that the system was fair. These weren't people skimming off the top for survival. They were skilled at controlling perception, and they were robbing not just the business, but the spirit of teamwork. Morning Maple had tried to build servers like Kayla dishwashers in the backline cooks who never even saw the register. They all believed they were part of a collective effort, and yet their share had been quietly pocketed day after day. That realization hit Logan harder than he expected. It wasn't just money being stolen. It was morale. It was fairness. It was faith in each other. Kayla wasn't just asking about the jar. She was expressing a growing doubt in her coworkers, the beginnings of distrust that, if left unchecked, could rot an entire team from within. And Tyler's answer, while deceptively light-hearted, was a scalpel slicing through that trust. Brandon's silence, his indifference was salt in the wound. Logan pulled out his phone, not to take notes this time, but to send a quick message to Jim. They're feeding lies to staff. Add audio flags for both Tyler and Brandon during downtime interactions. This isn't just theft, it's culture damage, as he hit. Logan leaned back in his seat, watching the two men continue their shift as if nothing had happened. He now understood the full picture. They weren't just stealing dollars, they were rewriting the story that everyone else believed, but not for much longer, because soon the real story would be told, and this time it would be impossible to ignore. Logan Reed sat in his home office later that evening, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across papers, files, and a laptop screen filled with names and timestamps. The quiet hum of the city outside felt distant, irrelevant. What consumed him now was a single personnel file open to its final page. Aaron Walters, the man they had fired, the man they had blamed, the man Logan himself had signed off on just 3 weeks prior, a decision that had seemed clean, clear, justified. At least until now, Logan's fingers hovered over the printed termination report, eyes scanning the lines that once told a convincing story but now screamed of a lie. The document laid out the reasoning repeated register discrepancies during Aaron's shifts, a spike in customer complaints about incorrect change, and a written statement from a witness. Brandon Logan stared at that name for a long time, the weight of its deceit pressing against his chest. Brandon had claimed he saw Aaron pocketing money. Tyler had backed it up with screenshots of register logs and snippets of video. At the time, the evidence had felt overwhelming. Now, in the wake of what Logan had seen with his own eyes, it felt like theater carefully staged, edited, and designed to condemn an innocent man. Logan opened a separate file and began cross-referencing timestamps from Aaron's final week at Morning Maple with the raw surveillance footage Jim had recovered and stored. That's when the truth became undeniable. On the morning of Aaron's final shift, a register discrepancy was logged $40 short. Tyler and Brandon had provided footage that seemed to show Aaron at the register alone, but the full, unedited version showed something very different. Logan watched in silence as Brandon stepped up to the register. Minutes before Aaron arrived for his shift, Brandon handled a refund transaction, one not recorded in the daily log, and then left. When Aaron entered the frame moments later, he was simply restocking cups, but the doctored version, trimmed and reframed, omitted Brandon's entire interaction. It made it look as though Aaron had been there the entire time. Logan's throat tightened. It wasn't a mistake, it was a setup. He dug deeper. One by one, he examined every complaint attributed to Aaron. One customer said they received $5 less than they were owed. Another claimed Aaron was acting nervous when returning change. But when Logan reviewed the corresponding video, Brandon was the one handling the transaction. In fact, Aaron wasn't even in the building at the time of at least 2 incidents. His shift hadn't started. The falsified reports hadn't just misidentified him. They had deliberately shifted the blame. Logan ran his hand through his hair in disbelief. The precision of the manipulation was staggering. Tyler and Brandon hadn't just lied. They had fabricated an alternate reality, one that left Aaron with no defense, but the final blow came when Jim sent Logan a still image pulled from the system logs, a screen capture showing that during the week, Aaron was terminated. Jason, under Tyler's credentials, had temporary admin access to the security camera software, supposedly to help troubleshoot an upload delay while the IT manager was on vacation. Jim's note was brief. They had control of the footage, boss. They trimmed it, clipped it, and replaced the files on the server. Logan sat back in his chair, numb. It wasn't just that Aaron had been blamed, it was that he'd been erased, silenced, rewritten, and no one questioned it. Not the manager who recommended the termination, not the HR team that signed off, and not Logan. He had approved it himself, trusting the system, trusting his people. He thought back to Aaron's exit interview, short, quiet, defeated. The man had barely spoken, offering only a soft, "I understand," when handed the decision. But now Logan could see the truth behind that silence, not guilt, but resignation. The kind that only comes when you know you've already been judged, when defending yourself would be like shouting into a storm. That moment now haunted Logan. A man's future had been destroyed, not because he'd made a mistake, but because he'd gotten in the way of thieves. The next file Logan opened was Aaron's resume. It was still on record untouched, since his termination college graduate. 3 years of spotless employment history, Employee of the Month, twice positive peer reviews, notes about covering shifts for sick co-workers and helping new hires train on the register system. A model team member, Logan, clenched his jaw. He had thrown all of that away on the word of 2 men who were stealing from under his nose. The guilt was sharp, but it fueled his resolve. This wasn't just about exposing Tyler and Brandon anymore. It was about justice for Aaron, for every employee misled, and for a business that had been used as a mask for deception. And justice, Logan decided, would begin with truth. And the first truth was this: Aaron Walters was innocent. Logan's eyes burned as the evening dragged into night, the glow of his laptop illuminating a room filled with silent anger. He had already uncovered enough to fire both Tyler and Brandon, but Logan wasn't looking for enough anymore. He was looking for everything he wanted. Their lies, their arrogance, their carelessness, all on record. So he dug deeper into archived emails, message logs, and chat histories from the company's internal messaging system. He was no longer just a CEO trying to fix a mistake. He was a man unraveling the rot at the heart of his own house, and what he found next made his blood run cold, buried in the system's backup server restored. Thanks to Jim's assistance was a thread of text messages between Tyler and Brandon dated 3 weeks ago, the day Aaron was fired. Logan's hand hovered over his mouse as he opened the first message. It worked. Aaron's gone. Tyler had written, Brandon replied. Seconds later, too easy. Manager bought everything. LOL. Logan scrolled further. Tyler, now, we don't have to worry about him catching on Brandon. Did you see his face when they handed him the papers? Priceless. And then the message that turned Logan's stomach. First rounds on Aaron's last paycheck. For a moment, Logan couldn't breathe. The audacity, the cruelty. It wasn't just that they'd framed an innocent man, they had celebrated it, laughed about it, treated it like a game. They had stripped Aaron of his dignity, cost him his livelihood, and then toasted to it like they'd won a bet. Logan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. This wasn't just theft of money, it was theft of character, of justice, of humanity. He reached for his phone, snapped a screenshot of the conversation, and forwarded it directly to his legal team with a single line. We will pursue this to the full extent of the law. Prepare a wrongful termination response package. Then, with a steadiness born not of calm, but of conviction, Logan opened a blank document and began to type, not a memo, not a report, a letter. One that had been overdue since the day Aaron walked out those doors without protest, without a single raised voice, carrying the weight of an accusation he hadn't earned. The words came slowly at first, then they poured out, shaped by guilt, responsibility, and something deeper, remorse. He addressed Aaron directly. Dear Aaron, I failed you. From there he recounted the truth, how the evidence had been manipulated, how Tyler and Brandon had conspired, how the company's trust in them had been misplaced, and most importantly, how Logan himself had been part of the problem. Too quick to sign a termination, too slow to question what didn't add up. He paused only once to reread what he had written so far. Then he kept going this time, outlining what would be done to make it right. An offer to reinstate Aaron's position. But more than that, a formal exoneration sent to every employer who had received his termination notice, a public internal statement to all Morning Maple staff explaining the truth, and a financial compensation package already approved by legal, not as a payout, but as a symbol that his time, his name, and his dignity were worth more than a few weeks of silence. Logan signed the letter with his full name, no digital signature, no corporate shorthand, just ink, personal and real. He attached the screenshots to a secure folder, filed the draft letter with his legal team, and sat back as the quiet of the room finally settled around him. Outside the night had fully fallen, but inside a different kind of dawn had begun. The fog of denial had cleared, replaced by a steady light of accountability. Logan didn't feel better. He didn't expect to. This wasn't about clearing his conscience. It was about correcting a wrong. He had trusted the wrong people, questioned the wrong man, and let his company's core values erode under the surface of efficiency and assumptions. But now he was ready to face it all, and that started with making sure Aaron Walters received more than an apology. He would receive justice, a voice, a return to the dignity that had been stolen. And this time, Logan would be the one standing beside him, not as a boss trying to clean up a mess, but as a man who finally saw what he should have seen from the very beginning. Because sometimes leadership isn't about never making mistakes, it's about owning them and doing whatever it takes to make them right. The morning arrived with a crispness that matched Logan Reed's resolve. The city was still waking up, but he had already been up for hours, suit-pressed tie, knotted shoes, polished to a shine. Today there would be no disguise, no baseball cap, no hoodie. Today he returned to Morning Maple as himself, the founder, the owner, the man who had spent the last week watching from the shadows while the truth unraveled before his eyes. He parked across the street, glanced into the side mirror to straighten his collar, and stepped out into the sunlight with calm, deliberate confidence. It was time Logan entered the restaurant with a quiet authority that drew eyes before he even reached the host stand. One of the servers recognized him instantly, nearly dropping a tray. "Mr. Reed," she stammered, "we weren't told you were visiting today." Logan smiled warmly, as if this were just a routine check-in. "No worries," he said calmly. "I just wanted to see the morning rush in action." Behind him, his head of security, Jim Martinez, waited in a nondescript van parked out of view, eyes glued to a live feed from the hidden cameras now strategically installed throughout the space. They'd rehearsed every angle, every trap. All Logan needed now was patience and timing. He sat at the counter just a few feet from the registers where Tyler and Brandon were starting their shift. Both men looked momentarily startled when they noticed him, but quickly recovered. Tyler gave a stiff nod. Brandon forced a smile. Logan returned both gestures with the calm of a man who already knew the ending to the story. He ordered a black coffee and a muffin, making idle conversation with the nearby patrons, eyes casually scanning the floor, ears tuned to the faint voice in his earpiece. "They're watching you," Jim whispered through the line. Tyler just texted Brandon. "Can't see what it says yet. Stay the course." Logan finished his coffee slowly, then pulled out his wallet. It was time he stepped up to Tyler's register, ordered another coffee to go, and laid a crisp $20 bill on the counter, separate from the payment. "This is for your team," he said clearly, holding Tyler's gaze. "Thank you for the service." Tyler smiled a little too wide. "Thank you, sir. I'll make sure it gets to the jar." Logan nodded, politely stepped away, and pretended to take a phone call just outside the view of the counter, but he remained well within the security feed's coverage. His eyes, hidden behind sunglasses, watched Tyler out of the corner of his vision. Jim's voice came through low and steady. "He's looking at the bill. He's glancing around, and it's gone. Pocketed." Logan waited a beat, then turned, slowly walked back to the counter and spoke just loud enough for the surrounding staff to hear. "I believe I left a tip for the team. Did you happen to place it in the jar?" Tyler froze hand. Halfway to his apron pocket, his face drained of color, but he recovered quickly. "Oh, yes, sir. Just about to do that now." He reached in and placed the $20 into the tip jar with exaggerated care. Logan smiled, pleasant on the surface, but his eyes sharp. "That's very thoughtful of you to keep it safe, without breaking rhythm." Logan turned to Brandon's register. "I'll take a blueberry muffin to go," he said, pulling out another $20. This time he held it up clearly, then set it down beside the receipt printer. "Please make sure this goes to everyone, not just yourself," he said evenly. Brandon nodded quickly, his hand trembling slightly. "Of course, sir. Absolutely." Logan stepped back again, turning toward the restrooms, but staying within sight. Jim's voice followed. He's hesitating, looking at Tyler, and he just slipped it under the drawer. It's not in the jar. Logan returned to the counter, smile unwavering. "And how's the jar looking?" he asked casually. Brandon, now visibly rattled, reached for the empty container and stammered, I was about to add it in. He fumbled to retrieve the bill. Logan watched him, saying nothing at first, then offered a quiet but firm statement. I appreciate your honesty. It's never too late to do the right thing. Brandon placed the bill in the jar without another word. Around them, several staff members had begun to notice. A few were whispering. The atmosphere had shifted. Tyler and Brandon were trying to play catch-up in a game they no longer controlled. And Logan, he had set the final trap, and both had walked straight into it. The bait had been taken, the cameras had recorded it, and the man they thought was just another customer had returned not in secret, but in full view with the power to expose everything. What came next would not be whispered. It would be shown, shared, and remembered not just as justice, but as a lesson. And as Logan stood calmly at the edge of the counter, hands resting lightly in his pockets, he knew the final act was about to begin. The air inside Morning Maple had shifted. The usual clatter of dishes and hum of casual conversation had faded into an uneasy stillness. Employees glanced at each other, unsure of what exactly was happening, but sensing that something had changed. Logan stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, but radiating a presence that drew every eye in the room. Sarah, he said gently, nodding toward the manager who had just stepped out from the kitchen. Would you gather the staff? Please, I'd like to speak to everyone. She blinked, startled. Now. Yes, he replied. Right now. Within minutes, the servers' line cooks, bussers, and front counter team had assembled near the register. A few customers lingered in booths, curious about the commotion, but most of the focus was now on Logan and the small table beside him, where Jim Martinez had just wheeled in a compact projector and laptop from the van. Jim connected the feed, silently nodding to Logan once everything was ready. The screen flickered to life, casting an image onto the back wall, the familiar interior of their own restaurant captured from overhead. Then the footage began to play. No one spoke. The silence was deafening as clip after clip rolled across the screen. Tyler reaching into the tip jar and slipping bills into his pocket. Brandon palming 20s from the register drawer during false refund transactions. Clear, damning footage, time-stamped, uncut, irrefutable. Every angle had been captured. Every movement exposed. When the video showed the elderly man handing Tyler a $10 bill for the whole team, only for it to disappear into his apron. Seconds later, an audible gasp filled the room. Even Tyler and Brandon had gone pale eyes, darting wildly, their confident facades crumbling like paper. Logan let the footage run uninterrupted. He wanted every staff member to see it with their own eyes, to witness not just the theft, but the ease with which it had been carried out. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice even and clear. This is not the Morning Maple we built. This is not the culture we promised each other. What you just saw isn't just theft, it's betrayal. Not only were your hard-earned tips being stolen right from under you, but an innocent man. Aaron Walters was framed, humiliated, and terminated to protect this operation. The room remained still, but the energy had shifted from confusion to outrage. Logan continued pulling out a printed document and holding it up. Here are the text messages between Tyler and Brandon the day Aaron was fired. They admitted to setting him up. They laughed about it. They celebrated with his paycheck. And worse, security footage was edited. Complaints were fabricated, and all of us were manipulated into believing Aaron was the problem. Jim clicked a new slide onto the screenshots of the texts, side by side with timestamps from the security system, showing when the edits were made. Logan's voice never rose, but the weight behind his words landed like a hammer. They didn't just steal money, they stole someone's future. From the crowd, Kayla, the young server who had once questioned the empty tip jar, stepped forward. Her voice trembled. You mean all those slow tip days? It wasn't the customers. Logan shook his head. No. You were lied to. Your tips were taken. Your trust was abused. Murmurs rippled across the group, some in disbelief, others in fury. One of the line cooks clenched his fists. Aaron was the best shift supervisor we had. He always stayed late when we were behind, and we believed them over him. The guilt was spreading, but it wasn't theirs to carry it. Belonged to two men now, standing in a silence they could no longer escape. Brandon tried to step back, muttering something under his breath. Tyler opened his mouth as if to speak, but Logan held up a hand. "There's nothing you can say. Now that won't be handled through legal channels," he said, his tone still measured but firm. "You are both officially terminated. You will not touch the register again. You will not speak to the staff, and security will escort you from the premises." At his signal, 2 additional team members stepped forward, both shift leads, and moved into place beside the disgraced pair. Tyler's face was blank. Brandon's had turned to something bitter, but neither resisted. The game was over. As they were led out, Logan turned back to the staff meeting, every pair of eyes that looked back at him. "I owe all of you an apology," he said, voice steady but raw with sincerity. "As the owner, I failed to see this sooner. I failed to protect Aaron, and I failed to protect your faith in this place, but starting today, that changes." The staff stood in silence, many nodding slowly. Some looked near tears. Logan continued, "We will restore what was lost, every stolen dollar, every ounce of trust, every value we once stood for." This wasn't just about catching 2 thieves. It's about making sure Morning Maple stands for something again. The door to Morning Maple clicked shut behind Tyler and Brandon with a finality that felt heavier than sound. The room remained silent for a beat longer, as if everyone inside needed a moment to breathe. Really breathe after weeks, maybe months of tension they hadn't even known they were carrying. Logan stood at the center of it all, the image of calm resolution. He didn't look proud or satisfied. He looked responsible. And when he spoke again, his voice held the steady cadence of someone determined to rebuild something worth believing in. "I know what we just witnessed was a lot." He began addressing the full team servers line, cooks, bussers, managers, hosts, all of whom had gathered for the reveal. But this wasn't just about catching 2 people stealing. It was about uncovering something that had been eating away at the very foundation of who we are. And now that we've seen it clearly, we're not going to look away, we're going to fix it together. The staff, still processing the emotional weight of the truth, stood quietly. Some nodded, others looked to each other for reassurance, but no one turned away. Logan continued stepping closer, softening his tone. "I want to start with something simple but important. I'm sorry," he paused, letting the words settle. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions when Aaron was terminated. I'm sorry for every day you worked, thinking tips were down, or wondering if you'd done something wrong, when the truth is, someone else was undermining all your hard work. That's not a mistake I'll ever make again." His words weren't rehearsed, they were real, spoken, not from a podium, but from a place of accountability. That was something no staff handbook could ever teach. Then came the changes. "Starting today," Logan said, "we're implementing a new set of procedures around cash handling tips and transaction oversight. Every tip jar will be locked and transparent, and tips will be counted at the end of each shift with at least 2 people present. Register access will be restricted to trained managers. Only every refund or voided transaction will require a signature and a reason logged into our new digital audit trail. We're not just closing loopholes, we're building trust." Several staff members exchanged glances, hope beginning to stir beneath the fatigue of betrayal. "But this isn't just about systems," Logan added. "It's about culture, about the environment we create every day when we show up here, and that starts with transparency." He gestured toward the screen, now paused on a still frame of the video that had exposed everything. "We will no longer be a place where silence is seen as professionalism or where suspicion is brushed off to keep the peace. If something doesn't feel right, speak up. If someone's struggling, ask why. If a team member shines, let it be known, because the health of a workplace isn't measured by sales. It's measured by how people feel when they walk through the door." Jim, still seated nearby, gave a quiet nod. He knew Logan meant every word, and so did the rest of the staff. The weight of the morning had been heavy, but what followed felt like light cracking through the surface. There was something sacred about truth being spoken plainly. It reset the room, gave people permission to feel again. A few servers, visibly shaken from the earlier footage, stepped forward to ask questions about how tips would be distributed now. Others voiced appreciation that the issue had finally been addressed head-on. No one was rushing to go back to their stations. They were finally being invited into the heart of the conversation. Logan ended with this: "I can't erase what happened, but I can make this promise from today forward. Morning Maple will be run with integrity, transparency, and fairness, not because it's good business, but because it's the only kind of business worth running." The room responded not with applause, but with something deeper presence. No one looked away, no one dismissed the moment, and when Logan finally stepped back, allowing the staff to process and speak freely, he knew that while the work ahead would be hard, it would be honest, and that was more than enough to begin again. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Logan Reed pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a modest 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. The neon sign above the entrance flickered faintly: Charlie's Grill and Breakfast. Inside the tables were half filled with night shift workers, a few students hunched over textbooks, and one man in a navy apron who moved through the space with quiet precision. Logan watched from his car for a moment, unsure why his hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly. He had spoken in front of staff, fired 2 criminals, and admitted his own failings publicly. But this conversation, this one, was personal. This was about more than corporate reform. This was about making something whole again. He stepped inside the bell above the door, chiming softly. Aaron Walters was refilling napkin dispensers near the corner booth. When he looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. His posture stiffened, and for a brief moment his face was unreadable. "Mr. Reed," he said cautiously. Not with anger, but with guarded neutrality, Logan approached slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "I was hoping you'd give me a few minutes, Aaron." There was a pause, then a nod. Aaron gestured toward an empty booth. "I'm on break anyway." He sat across from Logan, wiping his hands on his apron. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. Just waiting. Logan didn't waste time. "I came to say, I'm sorry," he said, "not just as your former employer, but as someone who failed you." He went on to explain everything: what he had uncovered, what the investigation had revealed, and the truth about Tyler and Brandon's manipulation. Aaron sat in silence for most of it, occasionally nodding, his expression calm but distant. But when Logan described the doctored footage, the fake complaints, and the text messages bragging about setting him up, Aaron looked away, his jaw tightening. "I told them. I didn't do it," he said softly. "I told them over and over." Logan's voice cracked slightly. "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't listen." He reached into his briefcase and slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was a formal letter of apology, a reinstatement offer, and a compensation package for the wrongful termination approved by the legal team and signed by Logan personally. "But more than your job back," Logan added, "I want to offer you the promotion you were already on track for, shift supervisor at the downtown store." Aaron opened the envelope slowly, scanning the documents. The number beside the compensation amount made his eyes widen slightly, but it wasn't the money that caught his attention. It was the tone. It was sincere, unscripted, real. He leaned back in his seat, the weight of months of confusion, shame, and loss settling into something lighter. "I've been working here for the past few weeks," he said, almost as an afterthought. "It's not much, but it's honest." Logan nodded. "I've seen you in action. That hasn't changed." Aaron looked down for a long moment, then back up. "I'll accept," he said finally. "But if I'm coming back, it's not just to supervise shifts. I want to help change the culture. I want to make sure no one else goes through what I did." Logan extended his hand across the table. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." 1 week later, Aaron Walters walked through the front doors of Morning Maple, wearing a clean black button-down, a name tag that read "Supervisor," and a quiet confidence that hadn't been seen in the building since before his departure. The staff welcomed him back, not with fanfare but with warmth. Smiles, pats on the back, a palpable sense of relief that something broken had finally been set right. Logan stood off to the side, watching as Aaron jumped into action, coordinating the floor, checking in with servers, and calmly handling a register issue without breaking a sweat. He had always been that kind of leader, the kind who didn't raise his voice but earned respect through presence. By the end of that first week, something intangible had shifted within the shop. Morale was higher. The tip jar stayed full. Team members began volunteering to cover one another's shifts again. The laughter returned, not forced, but real. And in the quiet moments between the lunch rushes, Logan would catch glimpses of what Morning Maple was always meant to be, a place where people worked hard, treated each other fairly, and showed up not out of obligation but pride. None of it would undo the damage, but it was the start of something better, something earned. As Logan prepared to leave that afternoon, he paused by the counter where Aaron was reviewing the closing schedule. Their eyes met and Aaron gave a subtle nod. One of mutual understanding, Logan returned it. No speeches, no grand gestures. Just the silent agreement of two men who had both been tested, both made mistakes, and both chosen to fix them. The kind of redemption that didn't ask for applause, just consistency. And in that small moment, Logan knew Morning Maple wasn't just surviving, it was healing. If this story moved you, we invite you to reflect on the kind of leadership our world needs more of: quiet accountability, bold action, and a commitment to fairness, even when it's hard. At Deep Inside HQ, we share true stories that go beyond surface-level drama and speak to the heart of integrity, justice, and second chances. If you believe in workplaces where people are seen, heard, and treated with dignity, we encourage you to subscribe, share this story, and join the movement. Because every act of honesty matters, and together we can rebuild the world from the inside out.